The chickens had stopped laying eggs. For 3 weeks straight, not a single one. Martha Hayes, 62 years old, her hands still strong despite the arthritis creeping into her knuckles, stood in the doorway of the Coop that October morning in 1897 near Hazard, Kentucky, staring at the empty nesting boxes. Her grey hair, pulled back in a tight bun, caught the first light of dawn. The wrinkles around her eyes deepened as she squinted, trying to understand what was happening. It sounds like a simple problem, but what Martha found inside that hole would change everything she thought she knew about loneliness and survival. This is a true story from rural America that will make you question what we're capable of when we think we've lost everything. Before we continue, tell me what city you're watching from and leave it in the comments. I love knowing where you all are when you hear these stories. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and subscribe now so you don't miss the next ones. In the fall of 1897, the mountains of eastern Kentucky held their inhabitants in a grip of geographical isolation that few today can truly comprehend. Hazard, a coal mining town carved into the Cumberland Plateau, was a place where news arrived weeks late and where a widow without family might as well have been living on the moon. The dirt roads turned to rivers of mud with each rain, and the nearest neighboring farm could be 3 miles away through dense forest. This was a time when a woman's survival depended entirely on her ability to work land that didn't want to be worked, to coax life from soil that seemed determined to remain barren. The coal mines brought men to the region, rough men with blackened lungs and dangerous tempers, but they brought little else. The town had a general store, a church, and a saloon, in that order of importance, or so the preacher liked to say. For women of Martha's generation, widowhood meant vulnerability of a kind that kept them awake at night. Without a husband, a woman had no standing, no protection, no voice. The law belonged to men, the land belonged to men. Even the church, which preached charity, seemed to belong more to the judgment of men than to the mercy of God. A widow past childbearing age, without sons to work the land or defend her property, was considered barely more than a burden on the community. The Hayes farm sat at the end of a long valley, surrounded by hills thick with oak and pine. It was a lonely place, beautiful in its way, but oppressive in its silence. Martha had lived there for 34 years, since her marriage to Thomas Hayes in 1863, right in the middle of the Civil War. They'd built a life together, modest but dignified, raising chickens, keeping a milk cow, growing vegetables in the rocky soil. Thomas had worked in the mines during the winters when the farm couldn't sustain them, coming home each evening with coal dust in every crease of his face, coughing into his handkerchief. He died the previous spring. Lung fever, the doctor had called it, though Martha knew it was the mines that had killed him. 30 years of breathing coal dust had turned his lungs to stone. She'd held his hand as he died, watched the light fade from his eyes, and then she'd buried him in the small plot behind the house, next to the 3 babies they'd lost in infancy. Since then, Martha had been alone, completely, utterly alone. She'd tried to keep the farm going. What else could she do? There was no family to return to. Her parents were long dead, her only brother killed at Shiloh before she'd even married. Thomas had been an only child, his parents dead before Martha had met him. They'd never had living children who survived past age 2. The farm was all she had, and if she lost it she'd have nothing. The poorhouse maybe, or worse. But keeping a farm running alone at 62 years old was like trying to hold back a river with your bare hands. The vegetable garden had been manageable through the summer, but the fall planting was beyond her strength. The milk cow had dried up, and she'd been forced to sell it for a pittance to a trader passing through. The chickens were her last hope, her only reliable source of food, and the eggs her only source of small income when she could trade them at the general store for flour and coffee. And now they'd stopped laying. Martha stepped into the coop, her boots crunching on the straw scattered across the dirt floor. The hens clucked nervously, moving away from her, which was odd. Usually they crowded around her feet, hoping for scattered corn. This morning they huddled in the far corner, their movements agitated and strange. Something was wrong, she could feel it. The coop was a sturdy structure, built by Thomas 20 years ago from thick pine planks. He'd been proud of it, had made it strong enough to withstand the mountain winters, and tight enough to keep out foxes and weasels. But even the best construction falls apart without maintenance, and Martha had neither the strength nor the skill to do the repairs that were slowly becoming necessary. She walked the perimeter of the coop, running her weathered hand along the walls, checking for gaps. The hens watched her with their black bead eyes, still huddled in the corner. She was about to give up, to assume the problem was simply the cold weather coming early, when she noticed something odd about the northwest corner. The straw there was disturbed, pushed aside in a pattern that didn't look natural. She knelt down, her knees protesting, and brushed away more of the straw. There was a hole in the floor, not a small hole either. It was about the size of a dinner plate, the edges rough, the dirt around it recently disturbed. But this wasn't a hole dug from the outside in, the way a predator would dig. The dirt was piled on the inside of the coop, as if something had been digging up from below. Martha's heart began to beat faster. She leaned closer, peering into the darkness of the hole. It went down at least 2 feet, maybe more, the bottom lost in shadow. A cold draught rose from it, carrying with it a smell that made her pull back, her hand over her nose. Not the smell of death exactly, something else, something human. And that's when she heard it. A sound so faint she almost missed it. A whimper, soft and desperate, coming from deep in the hole. Someone was down there. Martha scrambled backward, her breath coming fast. Her first instinct was fear. Her second was to run to the house, to bar the door, to hide. But something made her stop. That sound, that whimper, it wasn't the sound of a threat. It was the sound of suffering. She forced herself to move closer to the hole again. "Hello?" she called down, her voice shaking. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, after a long moment, a voice. Weak, hoarse, barely audible. "Please." Just that one word, please. Martha's hands were shaking as she stood up. Every instinct told her to be careful, to protect herself. She was a woman alone, vulnerable, with no one to call for help. Whatever was down there could be dangerous, could be a trap, could be anything. But that voice, that desperate, broken voice. She hurried back to the house, her mind racing. In the shed attached to the side of the cabin, she found Thomas's old rope, the one he'd used for hauling wood. She also grabbed the kerosene lantern from the kitchen table and Thomas's hunting knife, which she tucked into her apron pocket. The knife made her feel slightly less helpless, though she doubted she'd have the strength or the will to use it if it came to that. Back at the coop, she lit the lantern and lowered it carefully into the hole. The light revealed a tunnel, dug roughly through the hard Kentucky clay, angling down and then leveling out. And there, about 8 feet down and 3 feet back, curled into a space barely large enough to hold her, was a girl. No, not a girl. A young woman, though small and thin enough to seem younger. Her dress was torn and filthy, her dark hair matted with dirt and blood. Her face, turned toward the light, was bruised and swollen. One eye was nearly shut, the other wide with terror. Her hands were bleeding, the fingernails torn, and Martha realized with a sick feeling that she'd dug this tunnel with her bare hands. "Lord, have mercy," Martha whispered. The young woman tried to speak but only managed a cough that racked her thin body. She was shivering violently, despite the fact that the tunnel, dug into the earth, was probably warmer than the October air above. Martha made a decision. She had to get her out. "Can you move?" Martha called down. "Can you reach up if I lower the rope?" The young woman nodded weakly. Martha tied one end of the rope to the support beam of the coop's roof and lowered the other end into the hole. The young woman tried to grasp it, but her hands were too damaged, too weak. She kept losing her grip. Martha's mind worked frantically. She couldn't pull the woman out alone, didn't have the strength. But she couldn't leave her there either, and she couldn't go for help. The nearest neighbor was Jacob Peterson, 3 miles north, and he was a hard man who'd made it clear he thought Martha should sell her land to him and move to town. She didn't trust him, didn't trust any of them. She would have to do this herself. She tied the rope around her own waist, anchored the other end to the beam, and lowered herself into the hole. It was a tight fit, and the descent was terrifying, her feet scrabbling against the clay walls. But she made it down. Up close, the young woman looked even worse. She was maybe 20, maybe younger. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Her dress, what was left of it, had once been a decent calico, the kind a farmer's wife might wear to church. Now it was barely rags. Her arms were covered in bruises and cuts, some old and healing, some fresh and still bleeding. "I'm going to help you," Martha said, trying to keep her voice calm. "But I need you to hold on to me. Can you do that?" The young woman nodded. Her good eye met Martha's, and in it Martha saw such desperate hope that it nearly broke her heart. Martha positioned the woman's arms around her neck. The young woman was lighter than she should have been, her bones prominent through the thin fabric of her dress. Slowly, painfully, Martha began to climb back up, using the rope and her feet against the clay walls. The woman clung to her back like a child, dead weight that made every foot of climb agony for Martha's 62-year-old body. They made it. Somehow, with muscles screaming and lungs burning, Martha made it back to the surface of the coop floor. She pulled the young woman up and out, and they both collapsed on the straw, gasping for breath. The chickens, apparently deciding the danger had passed, began to cluck and move around again, pecking at the ground as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Martha looked at the young woman lying beside her. In the full light of day filtering through the coop's slats, she could see the full extent of the damage. This woman had been beaten, badly and repeatedly. The bruises on her arms were in different stages of healing, yellowing older ones beneath fresh purple ones. There were rope burns on her wrists. Someone had hurt her, and she'd been running from them. "What's your name?" Martha asked gently. The young woman's lips moved. "Sarah," she whispered. "Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah," Martha repeated. "I'm Martha Hayes. You're safe now. Can you stand? We need to get you to the house." Sarah tried to stand, but her legs gave out immediately. Martha caught her, supporting her weight. Together, moving slowly, they made their way from the coop to the cabin. It was only about 50 yards, but it felt like miles. By the time they reached the door, both women were exhausted. Inside, Martha helped Sarah to the chair by the fireplace. The cabin was simple, just 2 rooms, but it was clean and warm. Martha quickly built up the fire, then heated water in the kettle. While it warmed, she gathered clean rags, the tin of salve she used for burns and cuts, and one of her own nightgowns. Sarah sat hunched in the chair, still shivering, still silent. Her eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal's, looking for exits, looking for threats. "Sarah," Martha said softly, kneeling beside the chair, "I need to clean these cuts. They're going to get infected if I don't. Will you let me?" Sarah nodded. Martha worked gently but efficiently, washing away the dirt and blood, applying the salve to the worst of the cuts. Sarah winced but didn't cry out. She'd learned not to cry out, Martha thought grimly. She'd learned that crying out made things worse. When Martha lifted Sarah's hair to check the wound on her scalp, she found what she'd been half expecting. A deep gash, partially healed, that ran from Sarah's temple back into her hairline, the kind of wound you got when someone hit you with something heavy. "Who did this to you?" Martha asked, though she thought she knew the answer. There was only one kind of person who hurt a woman this way. Sarah's good eye filled with tears. "My husband," she whispered. Martha had seen enough of the world to not be surprised, but she was still angry. Angry at the man who'd done this, angry at a society that gave men such power over women, angry at her own helplessness. "Where is he now?" she asked. "Looking for me," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "He'll find me. He always finds me." "How long have you been running?" 3 days, maybe 4. I don't know anymore. 3 or 4 days. In October. With nothing but a torn dress and no food. It was a miracle she was alive. "How did you end up in my chicken coop?" Sarah tried to smile, though it came out more like a grimace. "I saw your cabin yesterday. Thought about asking for help, but I saw you were alone, and I didn't want to bring trouble to you. I was going to just keep moving, but then last night I heard dogs." Martha's blood ran cold. Dogs? He has hunting dogs. Uses them to track. I heard them getting closer, and I panicked. I ran to your coop because it was the nearest building, and I started digging. Thought if I could get underground, they might lose my scent. I dug all night. She looked at her ruined hands. Kept digging even when I wanted to die. The dogs didn't come. They came close, I could hear them, but then they turned away, went back the way they came. I think maybe the chicken smell covered mine. Or maybe he called them off. I don't know. I just stayed in that hole, too scared to move. Martha helped Sarah out of the remains of her dress and into the clean nightgown. There were more bruises on her back, more scars. Some of them were old, years old. This hadn't been the first time. This had been going on for a long time. How long have you been married? Martha asked. 3 years. My father arranged it. Samuel Mitchell owns a large farm near Harlan. My father thought it was a good match, thought I'd be taken care of. Sarah's voice was bitter. Samuel takes care of his horses better than he takes care of me. Martha made Sarah lie down on the bed, the only bed in the cabin, the bed she'd shared with Thomas for 34 years. She covered her with the thick quilts, the ones she'd made herself over long winter evenings. Sarah's eyes were already closing, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. Sleep, Martha said. You're safe here. But even as she said it, she wondered if it was true. If this Samuel Mitchell came here, what could she do? She was one old woman alone. She had Thomas's hunting rifle, but she'd never been a good shot. She had the knife, but she'd never used a weapon against another person in her life. And yet, looking at Sarah's battered face, at the evidence of years of cruelty, Martha felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Anger. Pure, righteous anger and determination. She would not let him take this girl. The first few days were the hardest. Sarah slept most of the time, waking only to eat the broth and bread Martha brought her. Her body was healing, but slowly. Martha changed the bandages twice a day, watched for signs of infection, and thanked God when the wounds started to close cleanly. But while Sarah's body healed, her fear remained. Every sound made her jump. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind against the cabin walls sent her into a panic. She kept asking Martha if she'd seen anyone, if anyone had come by, if the dogs were back. No one's come, Martha would say. You're safe. But Martha knew that safety was a temporary thing. Samuel Mitchell would be looking for his wife. Men like that always came looking. And when he found her, what then? On the 4th day, Sarah was strong enough to sit at the table. Martha made cornbread and fried the last of her salt pork, and they ate together in the warm circle of lamplight. Outside, the October wind howled through the mountains, and the first frost had touched the ground that morning. I can't stay, Sarah said suddenly. I'm putting you in danger. Martha looked at her across the table. In just 4 days with food and rest, Sarah was already looking more human. The swelling in her face had gone down. The worst of the cuts were healing. She was a pretty girl, Martha realized. Delicate features, dark hair, wide brown eyes. Where will you go? Martha asked. I don't know. West, maybe. Find work somewhere. Change my name. He can't look forever. He owns a large farm, you said. He has resources. He has men who work for him. He can look for as long as he wants. Sarah's face crumpled. I know there's no escape, but I can't go back. I'd rather die. Last time he broke 2 of my ribs. Next time he might kill me. Martha reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. Then you won't go back, she said firmly. And you won't run either. You'll stay here. I can't. You can. You need time to heal properly. You need to get your strength back. And frankly, Sarah, I need the help. Martha gestured around the cabin. I've been trying to run this farm alone since my husband died, and I can't do it. The chickens have stopped laying because I haven't been feeding them properly. The garden is half dead because I can't maintain it. The cabin is falling apart because I don't have the strength to make repairs. If you stay, if you help me, we can both survive. Together. Sarah stared at her. Why would you do this? You don't know me. I'm bringing danger to your door. I know what it's like to be alone, Martha said quietly. I know what it's like to think you're going to die and nobody will even notice. I know what it's like to wake up every morning and wonder if today's the day you just can't go on anymore. I've been living like that for 6 months. And then I found you in that hole in my chicken coop and I thought, well, maybe God hasn't forgotten about either of us after all. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. He'll come, she whispered. When he finds out I'm here, he'll come, and he'll hurt you too. Then we'll be ready for him, Martha said. She said it with more confidence than she felt, but she meant it. She'd spent 6 months feeling helpless, feeling like she was just waiting to die. Helping Sarah had given her something she'd lost, purpose, a reason to keep fighting. They would face whatever came, together. The days settled into a rhythm. Sarah's strength returned, slowly but steadily. At first, she could only do small tasks, gathering eggs from the chickens, which had mysteriously started laying again as soon as Martha began feeding them properly, sweeping the cabin floor, mending the clothes that had been piling up neglected since Thomas's death. But as the weeks passed, Sarah began to do more. She helped Martha with the late garden harvest, pulling up the last of the carrots and turnips before the hard frost came. She fed the chickens and collected the eggs. She helped Martha patch the holes in the cabin's roof where the rain was getting in. She cooked meals, and for the first time in months, Martha ate well. They didn't talk much about Sarah's past or about Samuel Mitchell. But at night, sitting by the fire, they talked about other things. Sarah told Martha about growing up in a small town near Harlan, about her mother who died when she was 12, about her father who'd been a good man but weak, easily swayed by his neighbors' opinions. She'd married Samuel because her father told her to, because it was expected, because women didn't have choices. Martha told Sarah about Thomas, about their 34 years together, about the babies they'd lost and the grief that never quite went away. She told Sarah about the loneliness of widowhood, about the fear of losing the farm, about the nights she'd lain awake wondering if it would be better to just walk into the woods and not come back. They were two women from different generations, but they understood each other in ways that went beyond words. They'd both been shaped by a world that gave them few choices and then punished them for the choices they made. One evening, about 3 weeks after Sarah's arrival, they were sitting by the fire when Sarah suddenly spoke. "Do you think I'm a coward?" Martha looked up from the sock she was darning. "Why would you think that? I ran away. A wife is supposed to stay with her husband. The preacher said so. When I got married, I promised before God. You also promised to love and honor. Did Samuel promise the same? He did. And has he kept that promise? Has he loved you, honored you?" Sarah was silent. "A promise isn't a chain," Martha said, "and God doesn't want us to stay where we're being destroyed. You're not a coward, Sarah. You're brave, the bravest woman I know. You dug your way out of darkness with your bare hands. That's not cowardice, that's survival." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For making me feel human again." November came, bringing with it cold that settled into the bones and stayed there. The first snow fell, just a dusting that melted by afternoon, but it was a warning of what was coming. Martha and Sarah worked to prepare the cabin for winter, stuffing the gaps between the logs with mud and moss, bringing in wood for the fire, preserving what food they could. They were gathering the last of the apples from the old tree behind the cabin when they saw the rider. He was coming up the valley from the south, moving slowly, his horse picking its way carefully along the frozen ruts of the road. From a distance, all Martha could see was that he was a man, that he was alone, and that he was heading toward the cabin with purpose. Sarah saw him at the same moment Martha did. Her face went white. The bucket of apples slipped from her hands and fell to the ground with a thud. "It's him," she breathed. "It's Samuel." Martha grabbed her arm. "Are you sure? Can you tell from this far?" Sarah was shaking. "I know the horse. That's his mare, the grey one. It's him. He found me." Martha's mind raced. They had maybe 10 minutes before he reached the cabin. 10 minutes to decide what to do. "Go inside," she said. "Get the rifle. Load it. But don't come out unless I call you. Understand?" "Martha, he'll hurt you." "He won't touch me. Go." Sarah ran to the cabin. Martha stood her ground, watching the rider approach. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She'd spent weeks preparing for this moment in her mind, though she'd hoped it wouldn't come. The rider reached the yard and dismounted. He was a big man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and cold blue eyes. He was dressed well, in a good wool coat and sturdy boots, a successful farmer, a respectable man. No one looking at him would guess what he was capable of. "Afternoon," he said, his voice pleasant. He didn't remove his hat. "I'm looking for my wife. Young woman, dark hair, about 20 years old. I heard she might have been seen in this area." "Who told you that?" Martha asked. "The storekeeper in Hazard. Said a widow woman out this way had been coming in more regular, buying more food than usual. Thought maybe she was feeding someone. Damn." Martha had been careful, but apparently not careful enough. Small communities talked. People noticed things. "I live alone," Martha said. "Always have. I buy what I need." Samuel Mitchell looked at her with those cold blue eyes. "Now, Mum, I don't think that's quite true. See, my Sarah, she ran off about a month ago. Left in the middle of the night without a word. I've been worried sick about her. I just want to bring her home where she belongs." "If your wife ran off," Martha said carefully, "maybe she had good reason." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something dark. "A man's wife belongs with him. That's the law. That's God's law and man's law both. Now I'm going to ask you one more time, nice and polite. Is my wife here?" "No," Martha lied. He smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "You know what I think? I think you're lying. I think she's in that cabin right now, hiding like the coward she is, and I think you're going to step aside and let me go get her." "I'm not going to do that." He took a step toward her. "Old woman, I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you make me. Now step aside." Martha didn't move. "This is my property. You're not welcome here. Leave." Samuel Mitchell's smile disappeared. "You don't tell me what to do. I'm going in that cabin, and I'm taking what belongs to me." He started toward the cabin. Martha moved to block his path. He pushed her aside casually, as if she were nothing more than an inconvenient branch. She stumbled and fell, her hip hitting the hard ground with a pain that shot through her entire body. He'd made it 2 more steps toward the cabin when Sarah appeared in the doorway. She was holding Thomas's rifle. It was pointed directly at Samuel Mitchell's chest. "Get off this property," Sarah said. Her voice was shaking, but the rifle was steady. Samuel stopped. For the first time, his composure cracked. "Sarah," he said, his voice changing, becoming softer, almost pleading. "Sarah, honey, what are you doing? I've been looking everywhere for you. I've been worried sick. Come home, please. I promise things will be different." "No," Sarah said, "they won't. They never are." "I love you," he said. "You're my wife. I need you. Come home, and we'll forget this ever happened. I forgive you." "Forgive me?" Sarah's voice rose. "Forgive me for what? For running away after you broke my ribs, for trying to survive? I never meant to hurt you. I lose my temper sometimes. You know how you make me angry, but I'll do better. I swear it, just come home." Martha had struggled to her feet, pain shooting through her hip with every movement. She moved to stand beside Sarah on the porch. Together, they faced Samuel Mitchell. "She's not going anywhere," Martha said. "And neither are you, unless you want a bullet in your chest." Samuel's face twisted with rage. The mask of the concerned husband fell away, revealing the monster beneath. "You stupid women. You think you can point a gun at me? You think that scares me? You won't shoot. You don't have the courage." "Try me," Sarah said. They stood there in the cold November air, the 3 of them locked in a tableau of tension. The wind howled. The grey mare snorted and stamped her feet, and Samuel Mitchell's hand moved slowly toward his belt, where Martha could now see he wore a pistol. "Don't," Martha warned, but he was already drawing it. Everything happened very fast. Samuel's gun came up. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle roared, deafeningly loud in the mountain silence. Samuel Mitchell jerked backward. The pistol fell from his hand. He looked down at his chest, at the spreading red stain on his fine wool coat. And then he looked up at Sarah with an expression of utter shock. "You shot me," he said, as if he couldn't quite believe it. Then he fell. Sarah lowered the rifle slowly. She was white as snow, shaking all over. The gun slipped from her fingers and clattered on the porch. "I killed him," she whispered. "I killed him." Martha moved to the edge of the porch and looked down at Samuel Mitchell. He wasn't dead, not yet. He was breathing, ragged and wet-sounding. Blood bubbled at his lips. He'd been shot through the lung, maybe through the heart. He wouldn't last long. "Martha," Sarah was saying over and over, "Martha, I killed him. They'll hang me. I killed my husband. They'll hang me." Martha took Sarah's face in her hands. "Listen to me. Listen. You defended yourself. You defended me. He was going to kill us both. You did what you had to do. Nobody will believe that. I'm his wife. I ran away from him. They'll say I murdered him." Martha looked down at Samuel Mitchell again. He'd stopped moving. His eyes were still open, staring up at the grey sky, but there was nothing behind them anymore. He was gone. "We'll tell the truth," Martha said. "That's all we can do. We'll go to the sheriff and we'll tell him exactly what happened." But even as she said it, she knew Sarah was right. In a world where women belonged to their husbands, where a man's authority over his wife was absolute, who would believe them? Who would take the word of a runaway wife and an old widow over the reputation of a prosperous farmer? They stood on that porch for a long moment, looking at the body in the yard. The grey mare had wandered off a little way, cropping at the frozen grass, indifferent to her dead master. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky red and gold. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered. Martha made a decision. Maybe not the right decision, maybe not the lawful decision, but the only decision that made sense to her in that moment. They had a chance at survival, a real chance, if they were smart and if they were lucky. She wasn't going to let that chance slip away. "We bury him," Martha said. Sarah stared at her. "What?" "We bury him. Deep, where no one will find him. His horse ran off, got spooked. He went after it, got lost in the mountains, never came back. People go missing out here all the time. The mountains are dangerous. Everyone knows that." "Martha, we can't." "Yes, we can. Sarah, listen to me. You shot him in self-defense, but nobody will see it that way. They'll hang you, and I'll lose you, and I'll lose the farm, and we'll both end up in graves ourselves. Or we bury him, and we live. We survive. Together." Sarah closed her eyes. Tears ran down her cheeks, but when she opened them again, there was a hardness there that hadn't been before, a determination born of necessity. "Where?" she asked. They buried Samuel Mitchell in the woods behind the cabin, in a ravine where the spring runoff had carved out a deep gully. They dug all night, taking turns with the shovel, digging until their hands bled and their backs screamed. The ground was starting to freeze, which made it harder, but also meant the grave wouldn't settle noticeably when the body decomposed. They rolled him into the grave, still wearing his fine coat and his boots. Martha said a prayer over him, not because he deserved it, but because it felt necessary. "Lord, judge this man by his actions and by his heart. We leave him in your hands." Then they filled in the grave and covered it with rocks and leaves and branches until it looked like any other part of the forest floor. They led his horse 3 miles away and turned it loose, spooking it so it would run. Let people think it had thrown him and run off, leaving him injured and lost. They burned his gun in the fire until it was unrecognizable, then buried the pieces separately in different parts of the property. They scrubbed the blood from the porch with lye soap until no trace remained. And then, as the sun rose on a new day, they sat at the kitchen table and looked at each other. "What have we done?" Sarah whispered. "What we had to," Martha said. "Now we live with it." And they did. The days after were the hardest. Every sound made them jump. Every visitor to the farm, few as they were, sent them into a panic. But no one came looking for Samuel Mitchell. Not at first. He'd told no one where he was going, apparently, had ridden out alone on a hunch. When he didn't come back, people assumed he'd gotten lost in the mountains, as Martha had predicted. Search parties went out, but they searched in the wrong places, farther south where someone had reported seeing a grey horse. After 2 weeks, the search was called off. The mountains had claimed another victim. It happened. People mourned and moved on. Martha and Sarah settled into their new life with a caution born of shared guilt and shared fear. But slowly, very slowly, the fear began to fade. The work of the farm went on. The chickens laid eggs. The garden was prepared for spring planting. The cabin stayed warm through the cold winter months. They didn't speak of what they'd done. It sat between them like a ghost, always present but never acknowledged. Instead, they spoke of other things, of the future, of spring, of survival. One night in December, sitting by the fire, Martha said, "You know, people are going to start asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "About you, about who you are, about why you're here." Martha poked at the fire with a stick. "We need a story, something believable." They created one together. Sarah was Martha's niece, her brother's daughter from back east. She'd been widowed young, had come to help Martha run the farm. It was a simple story, believable enough, and in the spring, when Martha went to town, she introduced Sarah to the few people she encountered, told the story with such calm assurance that no one questioned it. Winter passed. Spring came, and with it the back-breaking work of planting. But this year, Martha wasn't alone. She and Sarah worked side by side, planting corn and beans and squash in the rich bottomland by the creek. The chickens multiplied. They bought a new milk cow with the money from selling eggs. The farm began to produce again, to thrive. Sarah changed. The scared, broken woman Martha had found in the chicken coop disappeared, replaced by someone stronger, more confident. She laughed sometimes. She sang while she worked. The haunted look gradually left her eyes. And Martha changed too. The loneliness that had been eating away at her soul receded. She had a purpose again, a reason to wake up in the morning. She had family, even if it was family created by necessity and bound by shared secrets. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Sarah said, "Do you ever regret it? Taking me in, everything that happened after?" Martha thought about it. She thought about the grave in the woods, about the man lying in it, about the laws of God and man they'd broken. She thought about the fear, the guilt, the sleepless nights. Then she looked at Sarah, at this young woman who'd become like a daughter to her, and she thought about the alternative. Sarah dead on a rope, herself alone again, withering away on this farm until she died unmissed and unmourned. "No," Martha said, "I don't regret it. Do you?" Sarah smiled. It was a real smile, reaching her eyes, transforming her face into something beautiful and peaceful. "No," she said, "I don't." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. Two women bound by blood and secrets, by survival and choice. The farm around them hummed with life. Somewhere in the darkness, the chickens settled into their coop for the night, safe from predators. The cow lowed softly in the barn. The creek burbled over rocks. They'd created something here, not just a farm, but a life, a family, a future. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled through the mountains and Martha lay in her bed listening, she thought about Samuel Mitchell in his grave. She didn't feel guilt exactly, but she did feel something, a recognition of the weight they carried, she and Sarah. The knowledge that they'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, but they'd survived, against all odds, in a world that gave them few choices and punished them for the choices they made. They'd survived. And that, Martha thought, was worth everything. 10 years passed. 10 years of seasons turning, of crops planted and harvested, of chickens and cows, and the endless work of keeping a farm running. Martha was 72 now, her hair completely white, her body bent with arthritis. But she was alive, and more importantly, she wasn't alone. Sarah was 30 now, still young, still strong. She'd become the backbone of the farm, doing the heavy work that Martha could no longer manage. She'd become something else too, a daughter in all but blood. They were family, bound by choice, and by the secrets they carried. Neither of them had married. There'd been opportunities, Men who'd shown interest, particularly in Sarah, but both women had politely declined. They had each other, they had the farm, they had the life they'd built together. It was enough. The town had accepted them more or less. The widow Hayes and her niece, a little odd perhaps, two women living alone but respectable enough. They paid their bills, they kept to themselves, they caused no trouble. No one ever found Samuel Mitchell's body. The grave in the woods remained undisturbed, covered now with 10 years of leaf litter and new growth. Sometimes, when Martha went to draw water from the creek, she would pause and look toward that ravine. She never went closer. She didn't need to. She carried the weight of it with her always, a constant presence like the arthritis in her joints. One evening in September, as they sat on the porch shelling beans, a rider came up the road. He was young, well-dressed, riding a fine horse. He stopped at the fence and called out, "Is this the Hayes farm?" Martha and Sarah exchanged glances. Visitors were rare enough to cause concern. "It is," Martha called back. "Can we help you?" "I'm looking for information about Samuel Mitchell," the young man said. "I'm his cousin, David Mitchell. I'm trying to settle his estate." Martha's heart began to pound, but she kept her face calm. Samuel Mitchell. He disappeared about 10 years ago. Last anyone knew he was heading this way, looking for his wife who'd run off. Nobody ever saw him again. "I'm sorry," Martha said. "We can't help you. We never met the man." David Mitchell studied them for a long moment. Then he nodded. "That's what everyone says. I suppose the mountains got him." "It happens." He gathered his reins. "If you hear anything, if anyone mentions seeing him, there's a reward, $500. "We'll keep that in mind," Martha said. They watched him ride away. Neither of them spoke until he was out of sight. $500, Sarah said softly. "That's a lot of money. Blood money," Martha said. "We don't need it." Sarah reached over and took Martha's hand. "No," she agreed. "We don't." The years continued to pass. Martha grew older, more frail. There were days now when she couldn't get out of bed, when the pain was too much. On those days, Sarah would bring her tea and bread, would sit beside her and read from the Bible or from the few books they owned. "You've been good to me," Martha said one such day. "Better than I deserved." "You saved my life," Sarah said simply. "You gave me a home when I had nothing. You gave me a family. You were willing to risk everything for me. How could I not be good to you?" "What we did," Martha said. "Killing him, burying him. Sometimes I wonder if we'll be punished, in this life or the next." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I've thought about that too," she said finally, "and I think maybe that we've already paid. We've lived with it every day for all these years. We've carried that weight. Maybe that's punishment enough, or maybe God understands that sometimes survival requires us to do terrible things. I don't know. I can't know. But I know that I'd do it all again, every choice I made, every action I took, because the alternative was death, and I chose life." Martha smiled. "You chose life," she repeated. "Yes, we both did." A few days later, Martha woke before dawn, feeling strange. Her chest was tight, her breathing difficult. She knew what it meant. She'd seen enough death to recognize its approach. She called for Sarah, who came running from the other room. "It's time," Martha said quietly. Sarah's face crumpled. "No," she said. "No, not yet. You're going to be fine." "Hush now," Martha said. She took Sarah's hand. "Listen to me. The farm is yours, all of it. There are papers in the trunk naming you as heir. You'll be fine. You're strong. You'll survive." "I don't want to survive without you," Sarah sobbed. "You will," Martha said, "because that's what we do. We survive." She squeezed Sarah's hand with what little strength remained. "Thank you," she whispered, "for these years, for being my family, for making me feel like my life mattered." "It did," Sarah said. "It does. You matter so much." Martha closed her eyes. The pain was fading now, replaced by a strange lightness. She thought of Thomas, waiting for her somewhere beyond this world. She thought of the babies she'd lost. She thought of the life she'd lived, the choices she'd made, good and bad. And she thought of the hole in the chicken coop 10 years ago, and the broken young woman she'd found there, the woman who'd become her daughter, her family, her reason for living. She'd made the right choice. Whatever sins she'd committed, she'd made the right choice. "Sarah," she murmured, "I'm here. The chickens. Don't forget to feed them." Sarah laughed through her tears. "I won't forget." Martha died as the sun rose, with Sarah holding her hand, in the cabin they'd shared for 10 years. She died peacefully, without fear, knowing she'd lived a life that mattered, that she'd saved someone who needed saving, that she'd been loved. Sarah buried her beside Thomas in the small plot behind the house. She stood at the grave for a long time, saying goodbye to the woman who'd been mother, friend and savior all at once. Then she went back to the cabin, to the life they'd built together, to the farm that was now hers. She fed the chickens as she'd promised. She milked the cow. She did the endless work that farming required, and she survived. Because that's what Martha had taught her. That's what they'd done together. They'd survived. 20 years after finding that hole in the chicken coop, Sarah sat on the porch of the cabin, now 50 years old, her own hair showing threads of grey. The farm was prosperous, more successful than it had ever been. She'd hired help, 2 young men from town who worked the fields and asked no questions. She thought often of Martha, of the choices they'd made, of the grave in the woods that no one had ever found, and now never would. The earth had reclaimed it completely, hiding their secret forever. Sometimes she felt guilty. Sometimes she wondered if they'd been wrong, if they should have faced the law, if they'd damned themselves with their actions. But mostly, she felt grateful. Grateful for the years she'd had with Martha. Grateful for the life she'd been able to build. Grateful for survival. She looked out at the mountains, painted gold by the setting sun, and she thought about everything that had brought her here. The desperate flight from an abusive husband. The hole she'd dug with her bare hands trying to hide from hunting dogs. The old woman who'd found her and refused to let her die. The choice they'd made together, terrible and necessary. She'd lived. Against all odds. In a world designed to break women like her, she'd lived. And in the end, maybe that was enough. And so ends the remarkable story of Martha Hayes and Sarah Mitchell. 2 women from different generations who found each other in the darkest moment and built something beautiful from desperation and courage. What would you have done in Martha's place? When survival demands impossible choices, where do we draw the line between right and wrong? If this story moved you, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Share it with someone who needs to remember that even in our darkest hours, we're capable of more strength than we ever imagined. And tell me in the comments, do you think Martha and Sarah made the right choice? Or should they have faced the law, regardless of the consequences? Until the next story. And remember, sometimes the family we choose is stronger than the family we're born into. Take care.